Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Easy Conversations podcast, a podcast about having easy conversations where we talk about mental health, adversity, spirituality, and societal issues. I'm your host, Furkan Dandia, and I'm really excited to share this episode with the listeners today. It's seldom you get an opportunity to thank and talk to someone who's had a profound impact on your journey. But today's guest is an author who shared a book with the world, and I happened to read it. And I reached out to her, and she was gracious enough to come on this podcast and have this conversation with me. So I wanted to welcome the remarkable Helwa, an author, a spiritual teacher, and the mind behind the groundbreaking book, Secrets of Divine Love, a spiritual journey into the heart of Islam. Join us as we embark on a profound exploration of the mystical and spiritual aspects of Islam. Helwa takes us on a captivating journey through the pages of her book, where she unveils the essence of Islamic spirituality that often remains hidden beneath the surface. As an advocate for inclusivity and understanding, she sheds light on the profound teachings of Islam that center around the concept of divine love. In this episode, we delve deep into the heart of Helwa's work, discussing the essence of divine love, spiritual transformation, interfaith dialogue, challenges and misconceptions, and the power of spiritual connection. Join us for this enlightening conversation as we bridge gaps of misunderstanding and embark on a spiritual journey that transcends religious boundaries. Helwa's wisdom and perspective provide a refreshing and much-needed view on the beautiful tapestry of Islam's spiritual heritage. Whether you're a seeker of knowledge, a person of faith, or simply curious about spirituality, this episode offers invaluable insights and inspiration. Helwa believes that every single person on earth is deeply loved by the divine. She is an award-winning author who has inspired hundreds of thousands of readers through her passionate, poetic, and love-based approach to spirituality. With over 15 years of experience writing and speaking on Islam and spiritual development, Helwa draws from her personal experiences and traditional sources to help her readers access divine love in everyday life. In addition to Secrets of Divine Love, which is currently available in English, French, German, Arabic, Bahasa, and Turkish, Helwa has also published the Secrets of Divine Love Journal, a book of poetry called From Darkness into Light, and a Ramadan children's book called The Blessed Pomegranates, a Ramadan story about giving. When Helwa is not writing at coffee shops, she can be found climbing mountains, camping in deserts, hiking through jungles, or reading about black holes. Learn more about her work and how to approach the divine through love online at her Instagram at a.helva_ or her website, www.authorhelva.com. And if you could leave a 5-star review or a comment after the end of this episode, I would truly appreciate it. All right, Helwa, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me. As I mentioned, I'm a big fan of your book, The Secrets of Divine Love, and I happened to read it roughly a year ago. And it was at a time where I was really struggling to make meaning in my life, and I had different experiences and just trying to figure out what my path was. And that's been a journey I've been on for the last several years. But as I mentioned to you, I'm extremely grateful for coming across your book that was recommended to me by a friend, and I happened to read it all over the course of a weekend because I just couldn't put it down. And it answered a lot of questions for me, opened up my eyes to a different perspective that I didn't have at the time. So I just wanted to share that with you, and I'm super honored that you're here to have this conversation with me today on the podcast. But before we get started, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to the listeners and let us know a little bit about what it is that you do.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast and for sharing your very kind words with me. I feel really grateful to be here. And I guess a little bit about myself is I wrote a book in a nice year of 2020, right as the pandemic
Yeah.
came out. This book, Secrets of Divine Love, Spiritual Journey into the Heart of Islam, is the book that I published. And I guess in many ways it took a journey of its own, one that I
Hmm.
couldn't predict. Um, and I think the question of who are you or what do you do? Um, I write, but I don't always consider myself a writer.
Hmm.
Um, so, but this journey has placed me in a path of learning and sharing and learning again. Mm. And I feel grateful for it. So I feel always honored to be on these podcasts and mostly to learn from you
Mm.
and your path and your story. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And so nicely put. And I guess one of the things when I remember first picking up your book, and what resonated for me was your own pursuit of something. You obviously went on your own journey and came across things, and that inspired you to obviously write your book. But what was that journey like? And if you don't mind sharing in terms of what that journey looked like and where you are now as far as that goes.
Mm. Yeah, I began the path like many, I think, who begin a spiritual path, which is once you start inheriting it from whatever family you were born in, and you
Hmm.
start to not just investigate, but start to step into the inner realities of what your soul is actually looking for. I think one of the things I realized is no matter what we reach for, we're always reaching for God.
Hmm.
Things just get in the way. And that's what I would call an idol. So if I'm reaching for God when I'm going to the mosque, but I may actually begin to worship the religion instead of God.
Hmm.
Even I believe, having spent time with addicts in the US, something called I don't know if it's in other countries, but the 12-step program, or Addicts Anonymous. If you actually go and sit in these circles and listen deeply, you'll actually hear a group of people all searching for God. And it's just that they were intercepted with a bottle or a pipe or some drug. But really, they were never looking for just to get high. They were looking for home. They were looking for belonging, looking for peace, looking for an innocence of the past. They were, we could almost say, all searching for divine names of God.
Hmm.
Al-Wadud, the love, or As-Salam, the origin of peace or mercy. And so I think that one of the things I realized really early is every time I reached, I was reaching for God. And so it's just a matter of stopping for a second and having the awareness that what I landed on is not a law. It's
Hmm.
not the thing. It's not the work. Even if the work is beautiful, it's not that. It's the quality that I'm reaching for. It's to be in the presence of a divine reality that I'm longing for, that we're all longing for.
Hmm.
And so the spiritual path for me began in that realization of saying, there's something more here. And what is that behind the veil of the veil? And what is that attraction? Almost like a magnet pulling you. And so there's this unseen attraction, but it's there and it's pulling you. And if you really allowed yourself to be drawn by this longing in your soul, like where would you be? And what I've recognized now is it brings you into the divine presence that is always there,
Hmm.
always present. It's just a matter of our awareness. It's a matter of opening your eyes and seeing that there's so much color that surrounds you, but if your eyes are closed, you only see you only see darkness. And that for me was this great realization that the path begins exactly where you are, that peace is exactly where you are, that the spiritual path is less a physical distance from something. Because sometimes when we hear path, we think there's a beginning of a trailhead and then there's the summit. But
Hmm.
in this interesting circle of a life, it kind of is the same. Where you begin and where you end, the difference is the awareness. And so for me, that's such a wonderfully exciting idea, because it means wherever you are,
Hmm.
wherever you're listening to this from, in that very moment, you have the opportunity to be in the present through your awareness, because God doesn't move away from you, because God's not stuck in time and space. He's not stuck in a form.
Hmm.
Or it's us that's stuck in these forms. And so when we feel that distance, it's from ourself. And so for me, that journey began. And as I started to step into what is my soul really longing for, and really traveling around the world, um, looking for that. And there's a story that comes to mind that I'll share.
Yeah.
Is this man who he's seeking for his teacher. And so he goes, and as he's leaving his town, there is a kind of madman mystic. And he's like, "You're looking for your teacher?" And he's like, "Yes." He's like, "Do you have any advice?" And he's like, "Yes. You go that way, and he's going to look like me, but like 30 years older. And he's going to be next to a tree like this too. But go right. You just keep going that way. You'll find him." So the seeker goes and he searches and searches. And 30 years later, he comes back to his old town to find the mystic man, now 30 years older. And he's like, "Oh, you've arrived." And he's like, "You were my teacher this whole time. Why didn't you tell me before?"
Hmm.
And he was like, "The journey got you ready for this moment. You wouldn't have recognized me before."
Hmm.
And in a way, like, that's kind of true. It's like this journey really is about, it's like someone once said, everything you think of God is different. He's different from that. And
Yeah.
so it's really the undressing of all the things in the way for you to acknowledge the beauty of that present moment where you are in this time, in this space right here. And so sometimes we go on this 30-year journey just to find that we had everything we needed exactly where we were. And in many ways, that's my story too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. There's so much to unpack there. I think one of the things I picked up on as you were sharing that, even on that path, as you mentioned, it's recognizing that we need to have that compassion and empathy for ourselves. And I think for me, for the longest time, and I think a lot of people struggle with this, is there's this sense of shame and guilt we carry for maybe not having the right answer, but recognizing, as you shared in that story, that sometimes we're not ready and we need to go through that journey to find some of those answers. But looking back, having that ability to hold space for ourselves and being compassionate and having empathy. And then when we're able to do that, we have that same approach towards other people.
Mm.
And, as you touched on, even with AA, I've covered that aspect of people's journey on this podcast as well. And one of the things that does stand out is that spiritual side of it, for sure, that really resonates for people, because they're to your point, they're seeking connection, and that's the biggest thing. We're all seemingly seeking connection in different ways, and sometimes, to your point, it could be in the form of alcohol or drugs, and feeling lost. In my case, at times, I was also putting that my career on that pedestal and worshiping and having that misdirection, and often feeling empty and lost and not content because, like I said, it was misdirected. And I think that's part of the as you alluded to in the story, we need to go on this 30-year journey to figure that out and be ready to see what's been around us the whole time.
And I feel like touching on empathy and compassion is such a important part of this journey that I think that you really encapsulated well, which is that a lot of times on the spiritual path,
Mm-hmm.
people are so hard on themselves because they want to be better, because they, how, whatever their belief system is, but they feel like they can be better, and they're actually really witnessing ego inside.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just, if I could just get rid of this side of myself, or they become hard on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the trap in that is you begin to make it about yourself. And so, what I think empathy and compassion can do, and in a way, they say um, compassion or empathy, it's the Latin at least, is to suffer with.
Yeah.
So, in a way, like we begin that path and kind of, when it comes to others, we like suffer with them, meaning like we put ourselves next to them and witness life through their eyes, per se, and that creates a level of closeness. In the Islamic tradition, at least, it's about taking your eyes from yourself and turning it to God. And the difference in that is when you witness yourself, you're going to witness your sinfulness, which is fine, and you repent and you return to God. When you witness God, you witness an unending forgiveness
Mm.
that overwhelms whatever sins you have, because infinity overwhelms any number, no matter how large it is.
Yeah.
It's about also turning your eyes. Like, if you really want mercy in your life, it's going to be to an extent if it comes from you. It's going to be to an extent if it comes from me. But when we turn our eyes to the unending, to the eternal, to the infinite, it overwhelms. It overwhelms any number, no matter how grand. Even sitting in prisons, which is some of the time I've been spending recently, is when you're in prison, people feel like their sins are overwhelming them.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they look at themselves, there's too much to get through. So you can go like molecule by molecule, and we have practices. We do it every
Yeah.
morning. You have practices of repentance, or you can take the ocean of water and pour it into your cup, and eventually whatever's in there is going to be transformed into the ocean, because it's going to flush itself out. And so
Mm.
part of it is, if you're looking for more mercy and compassion, look beyond yourself, look to God, look to the beyond, look to the infinite, because the source is so much more, and it's unending. There's no bandwidth there. It's forever. And so sometimes when we're really stuck, we're stuck because we're with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so for
Yeah.
me, I try to signal, like, if I see stuckness, or if I feel resistance, if I feel these things, I know it's like a nice reminder to turn to God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, no, I agree with you. I think one of the things I've realized is that the resistance often means that you're doing something right. Otherwise, there'd
Mm,
be no resistance. And
sure.
then there's enough stories about people in being in prison too, giving where they're given that opportunity to be in solitude and often come to that conclusion, right? And uh, recognizing that, yeah, they've sinned, but there's an opportunity here to repent and course correct. And a lot of the times they come out finding more meaning in their life, which I find very interesting, right? Having that opportunity, sit there. And I talk a lot about finding those moments of stillness and solitude, because you tend to have that connection, as we've been talking about. And as you were saying that, I know you've quoted Rumi in the book too. So, there's a quote from Rumi that I really like, is where it's, you're, you're not a drop in the ocean, you're an entire ocean in a drop, which I find so profound, because then you can almost look at yourself, but everyone in that way, and recognize we're all part of something bigger, and
Yeah.
collectively, right? And that's why I think for me, just having that reminder also allows me to maintain that level of compassion and empathy for others as well. And I think it starts with giving it to myself first.
Mm, I love that. Beautiful. Yeah, and I think you're touching on unity in a way. And in the Quran it says, "I created you all from one soul." There is this element of connection deep inside of us that we can tap into. And if anyone's gone into nature,
Hmm.
and you breathe with the trees, you realize like you are a tree just in reverse in a way,
Yeah.
you know? And there's a real deep interaction happening between you and a tree as it's transforming air around you. And when you breathe, you change the world. That's actually it's you take in something and you give out something different. So you breathing, and then the fact that these breaths are recycled, they go through these molecules, go through you, eventually come through me. And the fact that wherever you are in the world as you breathe, scientifically,
Hmm.
there are molecules from my ancestors in your lungs and yours and mine. And we breathe in at least a molecule of Jesus's breath, of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's breath, that our breaths connect us. Beyond time and space, that there's something familiar.
Yeah.
And that is so absolutely beautiful that you could close your eyes and connect with someone who's passed on.
Hmm.
That you could close your eyes and connect with someone you'll never meet across the entire earth. And there's something in that it's almost like baked into the equation to not make you feel lonely if you could just be aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's profound. And one of the other things I find being in nature, it's always interesting. It's important to reflect on. I see a lot of you see a lot of the trees. There's some trees that are new or newer, and there's other trees that are dying, and they're all kind of like collectively, they're all one, right? And you've got some of the older dead trees that are either supporting the younger trees or they've made way for the newer ones. And it's, that's kind of like how we exist, right? As humans as well. And it's so fascinating to see. But then also for me, it's a way to honor people that have come before us and how they've served their purpose. And that often allows me to, and then that's where I think nature's therapeutic, because sometimes you get caught up in your daily stresses and you lose sight of the bigger picture. But it's often a good reminder to recognize that I can choose any moment to recalibrate and remind myself that I'm here serving
Mm,
a purpose, and whatever that may be. And that's what I try to encourage people that are often struggling or feeling lost is we all have a purpose to serve. It's just figuring out what that is and going in with it with an open heart and a pure mind, right? And that's but yeah, nature is beautiful for that, and it's a good reminder every time I'm out there.
mm. I think that to your point too is in a lot of ways, nature is a mosque, a temple, a
Hmm.
church, because every creature, every plant is in perfect worship of God. And so when you're with a stream, you're witnessing surrender manifested into form.
Mm.
When you feel peace, it's because you're walking on holy ground. Every creature, every blade of grass is in worship, is completely surrendered. They don't have the choice that we have to not worship or not bow or not to be in awe of divine presence. It just is. By nature it is. And so that's why there's a feeling of elation, peace, because it's like being surrounded by millions of the holiest,
Yeah,
most witnessing of divine presence. And so there's a way in which that energy is transferred.
yeah.
So when you're with a stream or you look at a tree, you're looking at a worship, a worshiping creature, even a stone. In the Native American tradition, they say to hear the voice of a stone is a high station. The
Mhm.
Prophet, peace be upon him, also has narrations of like holding a stone and just like, do you hear that? It's saying Allah, Allah, Allah. Like it's in witness of the divine. Regardless of your belief system, everyone kind of agrees that nature is this sort of holy space, because when you step in to a old growth forest or somewhere pristine, you can feel something, even if you can't put your finger on it, even if you can't wrap your language around it. You feel it, and it's real.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. And, sticking on the subject of unity, I did want to quote something that you had shared in the book, and that really stuck out with me. And the reason I want to share this is part of the reason why I also do this podcast is to share the stories of others and hopefully allow us to find that deeper sense of connection as we've talked about previously. But another hope of mine is to allow people to move past the differences, especially in today's world where I feel like so many of us are divided. We have these polarizing views, but I have this hope that, how can we come together and find that sense of common ground? And I think in what you shared here that I'm going to quote is, for all human beings are equal in the eyes of God. In the Quran, Allah speaks about all humankind comes from a single soul, as you touched on earlier. And so diversity in our colors and languages is not a means of creating separation between people, but rather an opportunity to experience God's boundless creativity. Religion was sent not to divide us, but to unveil to us the truth that although we may be separate fruits, we are all hanging from the same tree of life. And yeah, I find this really profound on many levels, but it's something I reflected on a lot recently too, is if we didn't have these differences or difference in perspective or experiences, there'd be nothing to learn from each other. And I think that's
Mm.
part of the struggle, or I guess part of our journey here on in this world is to learn from others. Cause when I meet someone who's got a different upbringing, different experiences in life, just a different outlook in life, they are able to share so many things with me that I would not consider otherwise, or they allow me to identify my blind spots. And I think that's amazing to be able to have that gift and be able to experience it with so many people. But I think on the surface level, we get stuck on the whole notion, oh, this person looks different from me, or he speaks differently, or he he does different things, and it just pushes us up further away rather than bringing us closer together. So I don't know what your thoughts are, and what um what was going on for you when you were sharing that.
Hmm. Well, I think it's such a great intention to be focused on unity because most of our problems come from separation,
Mhm.
from seeing distinction and differences before we can celebrate diversity. And I think the Quran makes it very clear that our purpose is to know one another, is to see parts of ourselves that we would maybe not see just in a mirror, that does not speak, does not interact, does not bring some of its own to us, you
Yeah.
know? And so when people become our mirrors, they give us the opportunity to get to know not just ourselves, but the collective whole in a way. Um, there's actually a story of a rabbi who asked his students. He said, when the sun rises at dawn, at which point can you tell the difference between the light and the darkness? And his students said, when I can tell the difference between a ruby and an emerald. The teacher said, no. Another student said, when I can tell the difference between a horse and a donkey. The teacher said, no. And the students struggled for some time, with the answers until they asked the teacher, well, what is the correct answer? And the teacher smiled and he said, it is when you look into the eyes of every woman, man, creature of God, and see them as none other than your brothers and sisters. It is only then that you will have touched the light. Until then, all else is darkness.
Mm.
So the story it's just a reminder that the purpose of these eyes is not to see separation, even though there are two eyes, and even though shapes and colors come to light, but it's in seeing beyond just these two eyes, it's seeing from the eyes of the heart.
Yeah.
When you can do that, you'll see that single breath through existence. You'll see God saying, I blew this spirit into the chest of Adam, all of Adam. It's just the single breath running through like a thread.
Mm,
The way I like to imagine it is almost like prayer beads, like there's a thread running through all these beads, no matter if they're different.
right.
But there's this thread holding it together, and if you could remember that thread, we have that in space. Call it gravity, call it orbits. There's an invisible thread that's like holding things together, this scaffolding. Maybe in, you know, in the language of the universe, you might say dark matter is that
Yeah.
scaffolding, but it's just this unseen entity that holds everything together. And so to remember that is honestly to be human.
Yeah.
They say that the human being is the only creature that can be not a human being because a tree is a tree,
Right.
squirrel is a squirrel, a rock is a rock, a cloud is a cloud. But a human being can be very many things,
Yeah.
not always human. To be human is to witness the unity and to see that there's things to be seen beyond what could be captured by the eyes that connect us. And when we forget, that's why there's an emphasis on the breath. When you forget of this inherent connection, this unity, you use your breath. You remember that you share a breath, that at the very least, someone could have a very different political view. But when you're in front of them, God chose to create them. He chose intentionally, not just for them to exist,
Right.
but in every moment, their continual sustained existence is a choice God makes. And so how then can you decide that they can be dispensed of, or they're not valuable, or their views make them then not lovable at all? I'm not saying that there is right and wrong. There is just and injustice. And it's not a but, and God chose to create them. So what are they showing you about yourself,
Right.
about the divine, and about the world that you're meant to investigate and be present with, that you may be avoiding or wouldn't have noticed without their presence?
Yeah. No, that's beautifully said. And you're right. I think there is a meaning there. And to your point, understanding what are you supposed to learn from that experience. At least that's how I try to look at things. I constantly remind myself that life is happening for us, not to us. So that gives you more agency when you start thinking of it that way. And speaking of that, as you were touching on earlier, this almost this invisible force that may exist between us. And for anyone who's experienced it, I know I have, it's profound and powerful. Even when you meet certain people and you're just drawn to them because of something, and it's hard to describe. It's something about their soul or the individual themselves that you're drawn to, and uh, it's again, it's this invisible force that you were talking about earlier. But that's kind of how I experience it. It's like, oh, what is it about this person that I'm so drawn to?
Mm, yeah, I feel that with people. Actually, Ali ibn Talib, which was, one of the companions, family members of the Prophet, peace be upon him, but he has this he said this saying about how when people you feel close to, this indescribable connection, is that in a realm that was more subtle, in the realm of the souls, that you somehow were close to each other.
Yeah.
That you almost rubbed metaphorical shoulders. And for those that you feel like just not a natural connection to, not that you're not connected to, that they were kind of distant in that space of the soul. And so sometimes I've experienced this before. You could go to a country thousands of miles away from your home and know someone for a day, a few days, and feel this indescribable closeness, this indescribable safety with this friendship that you could not describe. You could not describe in words, because we like to define closeness with time.
Hmm.
I've known this person for this much time, so it validates X, Y, and Z. But that's not necessarily true when you start to walk the spiritual path, really, because you start to notice that it's almost like souls have there's some magnetism. And it's like, if you're in that same hue of magnetism, like, it could be as if you've had many lifetimes
Yeah.
with a person. And although I believe in one life, I sometimes joke with some friends. I'm like, I've known you for a few infinities, like, this just feels so close. And instead of feeling like we always have to validate it in words or make a case for it, it's okay sometimes to just sit in the feeling of it.
Right.
And I think that's just an important point in general on the spiritual path, is there's going to be things that you have the opportunity to experience with God's permission that words just feel way too small to fit around, and to let yourself feel the expansion of it without feeling like you have to describe it. In a culture that says, if I don't have a photograph, did it happen?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's nice just to say, if I don't have the words for it, it could have still happened. It was still a feeling. It was still real. And I don't have to then wrap it in my mind, make sense of it, to then offer it up to someone who didn't taste or experience it.
Right.
To understand it's okay if it's just our own personal experience.
Right.
And I think we have to in a culture that shares everything, before you're even done with your food, it's like on the internet, so in a culture like that, we have to remind ourselves that it's okay to have an experience and to have it be your own, and to not make sense of it for other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you 100%. That's been a bit of a challenge for me too. And coming around to that, you're right. And I think part of it, to your point, is that need for validation that, hey, maybe if I can explain it to someone and they can validate me, then it feels real. But I think there's an aspect of surrender there too, as you talked about earlier as we were recording, that there is, I think, once you're able to surrender and let go of whatever that experience is, and I mean surrender to that experience, I think that alone is powerful and something deep and personal. And sometimes that's all it needs to be. You don't need to be able to put it into words or try to explain it away or to someone to get that sense of validation. The fact that it's happening to you alone is validation. And that's how I try to look at it, at least.
Hmm. That's a really great distinction. The fact that you're experiencing it is enough of validation, that it's been sent to you by God.
Mm-hmm.
Have some sort of realization. And this path, I think, it's customized. I think
Right.
that's the thing. It says in the Quran, it says, you will not bear the burdens of others. So you don't, and that also means others don't have to understand your burdens or your path or your blessings.
Right.
Like, it's yours for you to see something customized to your soul, to your spirit, to where you are on the path. There's a story of two students walking on a bridge, and a teacher was telling, and they're blindfolded, and the teacher was telling the one on the left, go right so he doesn't fall. And then was telling the one on the right, go left so he doesn't fall. And it's like, these are different. There's a different guidance, but it's because the situations are different.
Mm-hmm.
So it's specific to you where you are. Of course, there's a universality. Of course, there's certain practices that everyone, because of the human soul and condition, is called to partake in. Just like there's a particular way to lift weights,
Mm-hmm.
like there's not infinite ways per se.
Right.
If you don't want to get injured, there's a particular way. And at the same time, our paths are customized, because in every moment we're shifting and changing to us. So sometimes what's in front of us maybe doesn't make sense to someone else who isn't in that same state or station or hasn't tasted that same thing. It's hard to describe what something tastes like.
Yeah.
Even in real life, like if you haven't had a watermelon, it's kind of really impossible to explain to you what it tastes like. You
Right.
could be like, it's watery, it's red, but that doesn't really, it's sugary, but it's not quite what it tastes like. That moment they take a bite, it's like everything collapses in terms of description. And now they have a feeling, and that feeling overrides all the words.
Hmm.
Because an apple tastes apple-y and a watermelon tastes watermelon-y. And there's this way of like prioritizing tasting of something over explaining or reading. And that's why you see Rumi and you see the poets throughout time, mystic, the teachers, always emphasize the state, the tasting, the limitation of words. And the validation, to your point, is being like, this process came before me. That's validation of I've tasted, so I know something of this reality. Not everything, and constantly turn to God for confirmation, but you make him the one that validates,
Yeah.
instead of people who are in their own processes, are limited by their history.
Yeah, absolutely. And to touch on what you said just now around, not carrying the burden of others, I think that's so important. And I want to just take some time to talk about that because quite often we do get lost in that. I know I've had where, whether it's through resentment or just being upset and recognizing that, oh, this person's doing this and it's impacting me. And I've never been able to, you know, articulate it in that way as you did, that it is not like we're not carrying that burden of someone else. And I think once you start thinking of that in that way, you also gain more agency and then you're able to focus on the things that are actually in your control. And that's at least that's helped me and focusing it on that way. And I think also reminding myself that everyone's on their own individual journey and sometimes we do cross paths, but again, everyone's kind of on their journey figuring it out. And I think it's easier to not personalize things and maintain composure and focusing on the things that you actually control.
Mm. I think the key there is not personalize it. And I think in collective cultures, um, which many of us come from,
Yeah.
but there's an inherent um, threat that seems so extreme, but there is this presence of codependency
Yeah.
in a collective system. And where that really means, simplified, is that another person's state begins to affect you, and you begin to feel responsible for their emotional state.
Hmm.
So if they're sad, it kind of dampens your mood and you feel like you have to then make them happy, even if it takes you away from your purpose or your process or what you had planned. And so there is this way in which we're called to be helpful to one another and called to be in service. But where we are in service from makes a big difference. Are you in service because you feel like, for the sake of God, for the sake of goodness, for the sake of love? Very different than because you can't contain someone else's state,
Mm.
because you don't like it affects you, what they're going through. I don't mean in a human sense. Like, of course, if someone's sad, I'm not excited about them being upset. But
Right.
where you begin to internalize their sadness and you begin to feel like it's then your mission or purpose to change their emotional state, which you ultimately don't have control over. In many ways, they may not have control over. It may just be, as Rumi says, a guest visiting, this meant to come, bring something, and leave. And in collective cultures, we also run the risk of not allowing people to stay long enough in their quote unquote cocoon to get their wings. We kind of like keep pulling them out of their painful state. And sometimes maybe the wisdom is for them to sit in that state, that repetitive state that comes up, and to realize something from it and to learn something and to progress on the path. But we prevent them from that realization because we're not willing to hold them with mercy and love as they're walking through something painful.
Right.
And again, it goes back to, where are you acting from? If you feel guided by the divine, by God, if you feel like this really deep calling to go and be, then that's one thing. But if you're doing it because your ego wants credit, or you want to be the people pleaser, the one that fulfills needs, that's very different. And because you come from that place, the outcome is different. Where you come from in a spiritual setting, more than I think even a physical one, where you come from really does dictate what you get back.
Yeah, absolutely. I I agree with you 100%. Just to kind of quickly shift gears here a little bit as we come to a close, I am very interested in your why, and the why being, why was it important for you to share your words and put it into a book? I'm just more so curious out of personal interest, but even for the listeners, what was your motivation or purpose behind sharing this book, which to me at least seemed like, and I could be wrong, so feel free to correct me, but it felt like it was a personal exploration, but why then share it?
It's a great question. I feel like when I was on this path, learning, exploring, and I started to get so many gifts from these different teachers,
Hmm.
and it got to a point where it felt like I was like, oh, I don't know what I should do with this. So I would share it with my friends, and that was great, and I was satisfied with that.
Yeah.
And then in the book, I kind of talk about this too, but there's a moment where it just felt like, oh no, you're gonna like put this in a book, and I'll absolutely not. Like I was I rejected it, to be honest. Like I was so resistant until I started to feel like I have made so many prayers in my life, and God sent others to answer it. And it felt like, hey, maybe in this moment, you and all these teachers that you've come across and all your friends with these incredible experiences and knowledge, like maybe you're being called to put together something and offer it back. And when I really did feel that, finally that prayer and like dropped in, and it felt like this indescribable moment,
Mm,
the calling was just so strong that I couldn't deny it. And it was hard. It was hard because you have to fight all the things that come in the way of that.
right.
My constantly, the voice that I had was, well, there are teachers that, why don't the teachers read? They're so much more knowledgeable than I am.
Yeah.
Then I realized that everybody has their role. And there's a reason this book has a pseudonym, is because I don't feel like it's mine to own, because
Mm,
there's so many people that had a role. It's almost like an ocean, so many streams and rivers poured into it, that it's like, it's, how could it belong to itself? Like
right.
it has so much, um I have so much gratitude for that. And
Yeah.
I think if I said the real why now that brought it all together, was there's this thing that says you are loved. And that's something that many traditions, many belief systems believe, that you are loved. There's this thing that happened, is this one little word that dropped in that said, you are already loved.
Mm,
Like it's been done. It has been, it was, it will be forever. You are already loved. And I feel like when we begin the path with what we're striving for already given to us,
yeah.
how much does that make it different? Some people believe, oh, but if people feel loved and accepted by God, then they're going to do whatever they want. And I think that's very contrary to
Mm,
how human psychology works. Like if you really feel deeply loved by someone, if you really feel like, in a human sense, you want to make them proud, like you want to do things for them. You act from love because you value this thing. You see, wow, this is amazing. I feel held, safe. You want to do. But if you feel like you're at any point going to be cast out and punished in any moment, you act very differently. You
mhm.
act leaning back. You don't lean into connection because it's terrifying for you.
Yeah.
Of course, I believe in heaven. I believe in hell. I believe in accountability. And I believe that you are already loved. you begin the path with the what you're seeking already. Like, this is not the path where it's like, oh, it's almost like beginning a PhD program with a PhD already in your hand.
Yeah.
Like it kind of disorients us because we're used to time and space moving in a linear way. But that's the thing that the Quran has taught me and has frustrated so many people in the past, is that it doesn't go in chronological order, so
Right.
that you don't read it like a storybook. Things happen, you get destinations before you get beginnings. You get parts of stories that happen later, and then early parts that happen in them. It just completely it completely um, shatters the mind's ability to hold on to like a chronological order. And part of that purpose, I believe, is to remind us time is linear, divine reality, and things happen out of quote unquote order based on our mind. To me, is such a gift. So I guess my why is you are already loved before you even begin.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I agree with you. And I think that's probably the antidote to a lot of the struggle and challenges we see. I'm fortunate enough to work with people, but I see that quite a bit. It's that pursuit of something outside of themselves that already exists within them. And once you can make that connection, life does get a lot easier. And to your point, you end up being a vessel of that, as you are through the various teachers you worked with. It's bringing something together that's coming through you. And I think once you realize that, that's makes things a lot easier, I'd like to say. But Helwa, thank you so much for coming on here. I feel like I could talk to you for hours, but I'm trying to be mindful of your time. But and I really appreciate everything you shared, your wisdom and the stories. They were amazing. I do give guests an opportunity to share with listeners how they can be found online or social media. If there's anything you would like to share, please feel free to do so.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say I really appreciate the space that you created and continue to create. And I can tell just from the way that you hold a conversation, you have a very deep calling from God, and that you create safe spaces. It's such a gift. And I pray that God makes it easy for you, and that whatever burdens that you be carrying, both seen and unseen, they're lifted from you, and you're able to see the wisdom, their arrival and their departure. And mm, in terms of social media, my Instagram page is at a.helwa underscore. In terms of things that are happening in the future or this moment, I think that for me, what's more important than any project is just to remind everyone who's listening that you are already loved, that God is with you in every moment, and that there isn't a space that you could go to that isn't completely embraced and infused in divine presence, and that there's a big difference between God is watching you and God is watching over you.
Right.
And I believe that God is watching over you and that He is with you. And I pray for your deepest heart, for the sorrow, for the sadness, for the pain. I pray that every single place of wound or pain, that it's healed, and that you feel one again, and that you feel the light casting and descend down upon you, and that you feel the light inside of you rising and ascending upwards, and that your purpose becomes clear to you, and that you see and that you're reminded that you've intentionally created by a God who loves you. And every moment, God is intentionally choosing for your existence to be here. Without you, this world would be incomplete. The moment that God decided for you to exist. I pray that you remember that. And I pray for your journey, for you to be protected, for you to be safe, and for you to feel the grace of God in every moment.
Thank you, Helva. Thank you so much. Again, appreciate you, everything you do, and thank you for this enriching conversation. I'm super, super grateful.
Thank you so much, Farhan. I hope you have a beautiful day.
You as well. Thank you for checking out this episode with Helva. As always, please leave a review or a comment in the comment section. I always love hearing from you. Or please subscribe to the podcast. That's the best way to support this podcast. Thank you, and until next week.